The crimson stain spreading across Zachary Sutton's chest was the first thing Rebecca Harper noticed as her horse crested the ridge. And in that instant, her breath caught in her throat because she knew she was looking at a dying man sprawled against the rocks of the Sierra Nevada mountains. She had been tracking deer through these rugged slopes above Red Bluff, California, on this spring morning in 1877, never expecting to find a man bleeding out in the wilderness. Rebecca pulled her mare to a halt and dismounted in one fluid motion, her rifle forgotten as she scrambled across the loose stones toward the stranger. His eyes were closed, his face pale beneath several days' worth of dark stubble, and his breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps that sent panic shooting through her veins. "Sir, can you hear me?" Rebecca dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his chest where blood had soaked through his shirt and vest. The fabric was warm and wet under her fingertips, and she could feel his heartbeat, thready and weak but still fighting. His eyes fluttered open, revealing a striking gray-blue that seemed to focus on her face with difficulty. "Shot," he managed to rasp out, his lips cracked and dry. "Bushwhackers took my cattle, left me for dead." Rebecca's mind raced as she assessed the situation. The wound was high on his chest, maybe 4 inches below his left collarbone. The bullet was still inside him, she could tell from the single entry wound, and the way blood continued to seep steadily from the hole. If she didn't get that bullet out soon, he would die here in these mountains, alone except for her. "I'm going to help you," she said firmly, meeting his gaze. "My name is Rebecca. What's yours, Zachary?" he whispered, then his eyes rolled back slightly. "Zachary Sutton. Been ranching near Red Bluff for 3 years now." She knew the name vaguely, had heard of the Sutton Ranch on the outskirts of town, but they had never crossed paths before today. Rebecca had lived in Red Bluff her whole 22 years, helping her father run the general store after her mother passed 5 years back. She knew basic medicine, had helped tend wounds and illnesses in their small community, but she had never removed a bullet before. "Zachary, listen to me." She leaned closer, her dark auburn hair falling forward over her shoulders. "The bullet is still inside you. I need to get it out or you'll die from blood poisoning if you don't bleed out first. Do you understand?" His eyes found hers again, and she saw clarity there despite the pain. "Do what you have to do." Rebecca's hands were already moving, unbuttoning his vest and shirt with trembling fingers. The wound was worse than she had initially thought, the bullet hole surrounded by bruised, swollen flesh. She had nothing with her but her hunting knife, her canteen, and whatever supplies were in her saddlebags. This was supposed to have been a simple morning hunt, not a desperate attempt to save a man's life. "This is going to hurt," she warned him, pulling her knife from its sheath on her belt. The blade was sharp and clean, at least, which was better than nothing. Zachary's jaw tightened. "Just do it. Quick." But Rebecca hesitated, staring at the wound and then at her knife. The blade would work, but her fingers would be more precise, would be able to feel for the bullet without causing additional damage. She made her decision in an instant, shoving the knife back into its sheath, and instead pouring water from her canteen over her hands, scrubbing them as clean as she could manage. "I'm going to use my fingers," she told him. "I can feel better that way, find the bullet without cutting you up more than necessary." Zachary nodded, his face already graying from pain and blood loss. "Whatever you think is best." Rebecca positioned herself beside him, bracing one hand on his chest to steady herself. With her other hand, she pressed 2 fingers against the wound, feeling for the entrance. Zachary's entire body went rigid, a strangled sound escaping his throat as she pushed deeper into the torn flesh. His blood was hot and slick on her skin, and her hand began shaking almost immediately from the combination of fear and concentration. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," she murmured, her fingers probing carefully through muscle and tissue. She could feel his heartbeat against her palm, could feel every labored breath he took. The bullet had to be in here somewhere, had to be lodged in the muscle or perhaps caught against bone. Zachary's hand suddenly gripped her wrist, not to stop her but as an anchor, his fingers digging into her sleeve. "Keep going," he gritted out through clenched teeth. "Don't stop." Her fingers went deeper, and she felt him shudder beneath her touch. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool mountain air, and his breathing became more ragged. Rebecca's own heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest, but she kept searching, kept feeling for that small piece of metal that was slowly killing him. Then her fingertip brushed against something hard and foreign, embedded deep in the muscle of his upper chest. "I found it," she gasped out, relief flooding through her even as her hand shook harder. "Zachary, I found the bullet." "Get it out," he managed, his voice barely audible now. Rebecca hooked her finger around the bullet, feeling the ridges of the misshapen lead. It had flattened on impact, was lodged tightly in his flesh. She would have to work it free carefully, would have to ignore the way Zachary's body was trembling and the sounds of pain he could no longer suppress. Her hand was shaking so badly now that she had to pause, had to take a deep breath and steady herself. "You're doing fine," Zachary whispered hoarsely, and she realized with a start that he was trying to comfort her even as he lay there bleeding. "Just finish it." She worked the bullet back and forth gently, feeling it start to give way. Blood flowed more freely now, coating her entire hand and wrist in warm crimson. Her fingers were cramping from the awkward angle, her whole arm shaking with the strain, but she kept going. The bullet shifted another fraction of an inch, then another. With one final careful pull, the bullet came free in her fingers, and Rebecca sat back on her heels, staring at the flattened piece of lead in her blood-soaked palm. "I got it," she said, her voice shaking as badly as her hands. "Zachary, I got the bullet out." He didn't respond, and panic surged through her again. His eyes were closed, his face deathly pale, and for one horrible moment she thought she was too late. But then she saw his chest rise and fall, saw the flutter of his pulse at his throat. He had passed out from the pain, which was probably a mercy. Rebecca sprang into action, tearing strips from her own shirt to pack the wound and stem the bleeding. She worked quickly, efficiently, falling back on everything her mother had taught her about treating injuries. The bleeding was already slowing now that the bullet was out, and she bound his chest tightly with more strips of fabric, wrapping them around his torso to hold the packing in place. Getting him onto her horse was another challenge entirely. Zachary was tall, easily over 6 feet, and solidly built with the kind of muscle that came from years of hard ranch work. Rebecca was strong herself, but she was not quite 5.5 feet tall and probably weighed 100 pounds less than him. Still, she managed to wake him enough to get him halfway upright, then used every ounce of her strength to help him into the saddle. "Hold on," she told him, climbing up behind him and wrapping one arm around his waist to keep him steady. "My father's store isn't far." "Well, it's several miles, but closer than anything else. Just hold on, Zachary." He mumbled something she could not make out, his head lolling back against her shoulder. Rebecca gathered the reins in one hand and urged her mare forward, beginning the careful descent down the mountain trail toward Red Bluff. Every step seemed to take an eternity, and she found herself talking to him continuously, filling the silence with anything she could think of to keep him conscious. "I was hunting deer," she told him, her lips close to his ear so he could hear her over the sound of the horses' hooves on stone. "Wanted to bring back some fresh meat for dinner. My father, William Harper, he runs the general store in town. Has for 25 years. I help him now that my mother is gone. You probably know it, everyone does. We sell everything from nails to dress fabric. Zachary made a sound that might have been acknowledgement, and encouraged, Rebecca kept talking. I learned to shoot when I was 12. My mother taught me, actually. She was from back east originally, but she adapted to life out here better than anyone expected. She could hunt and track and handle a rifle as well as any man. She used to say that survival didn't care about propriety or what society expected of women. Rebecca's voice caught slightly on the memories. She died of fever 5 years ago. Sometimes I still forget she's gone, still expect to see her in the kitchen when I come downstairs in the morning. The trail widened as they descended, and Red Bluff came into view in the valley below, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the Sacramento River. The town had grown considerably in recent years, swelled by gold seekers and ranchers and people looking to make a new life in California. Rebecca had watched it transform from a tiny settlement into a proper town, complete with a church, a schoolhouse, 3 saloons, and her father's store right on the main street. "Almost there," she said softly, feeling Zachary's weight becoming heavier against her. "Stay with me just a little longer." By the time they reached the outskirts of town, it was nearly noon, and people stopped to stare as Rebecca rode down the main street with a half-conscious, blood-soaked man held in front of her. She pulled up in front of the general store, and her father came rushing out, his weathered face creased with worry. "Rebecca, good Lord, what happened?" William Harper was in his 50s, his hair more gray than brown now, but he was still strong and quick to act. He reached up to help ease Zachary down from the horse. "He was shot, up in the mountains," Rebecca explained quickly, dismounting and helping support Zachary's weight. "Bushwhackers," he said. "I got the bullet out, but he needs proper medical attention. We need to get him to Doc Morrison." Her father's eyes widened as he took in her blood-covered hands and the makeshift bandages wrapped around Zachary's chest. "You got the bullet out? Rebecca, that's incredible. Come on, let's get him inside first, then I'll fetch the doctor." Together they half-carried, half-dragged Zachary into the store and through to the living quarters in the back. Rebecca's room was on the ground floor, and they laid him on her bed, the clean quilt immediately soaking up fresh blood from his wound. She felt a pang at the sight but pushed it aside. Quilts could be washed or replaced. Lives could not. "I'll get the doctor," her father said, squeezing her shoulder briefly before hurrying out. Rebecca was left alone with Zachary, watching the shallow rise and fall of his chest. She fetched fresh water and clean cloths, carefully unwrapping the blood-soaked bandages and cleaning the wound as best she could. It looked better now, the bleeding reduced to a slow seep, and she thought maybe, just maybe, he would survive this. His eyes opened while she was working, focusing on her face with more clarity than before. "You saved my life," he said quietly, his voice rough but stronger than it had been on the mountain. "Don't talk," Rebecca said, though she felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Save your strength. The doctor is coming. What you did up there." Zachary's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on his chest, his fingers warm despite his blood loss. "That took courage, thank you." Rebecca felt her cheeks flush, suddenly acutely aware of how close they were, of his hand on hers and the way he was looking at her. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," he said firmly. "Not everyone would have had the skill or the nerve to dig a bullet out with their bare hands while shaking so hard they could barely hold steady. You're remarkable, Rebecca Harper." Before she could respond, Doc Morrison arrived in a flurry of activity, his black medical bag in hand and her father right behind him. The doctor was a gruff man in his 60s who had seen more than his share of gunshot wounds, mining accidents, and frontier illnesses. He examined Zachary's chest with practiced efficiency, then looked up at Rebecca with something like respect in his eyes. "You did good work here, Miss Harper," he said. "Got the bullet out clean, packed the wound proper. He's lost a lot of blood, but I think he'll pull through if infection doesn't set in. You might have a future in medicine if you were so inclined." Rebecca felt a surge of pride at the praise, even as exhaustion suddenly crashed over her. She realized her hands were still covered in dried blood, her shirt was torn and ruined, and she had not eaten or drunk anything since early morning. "What does he need now?" she asked, focusing on the practical. "Rest, fluids, and careful watching for the next few days," Doc Morrison replied, rebandaging Zachary's chest with proper medical supplies. "Someone will need to stay with him, change the dressings regularly, make sure the fever doesn't get too high. You up for that?" Rebecca glanced at her father, who nodded. "We've got room here," William said, "and Rebecca knows what she's doing clearly. We'll take care of him until he's well enough to return to his ranch." "I don't want to impose," Zachary started, but Rebecca cut him off. "You're in no condition to be moved any farther than necessary," she said firmly. "You'll stay here, and that's final. Besides, I went to all that trouble getting that bullet out of you. I'm not about to let you die of stubbornness now." A faint hint of amusement crossed Zachary's pale face. "Yes, madam." Over the next 3 days, Rebecca barely left Zachary's side except to help her father with the store during the busiest hours. She changed his bandages, brought him broth and water, and monitored his temperature anxiously as the inevitable fever set in. On the second night, his temperature spiked dangerously high, and she spent hours sponging him down with cool water, talking to him constantly even though he was barely conscious. "You have to fight this," she told him, her voice fierce in the darkness of her room. "You survived being shot and having a bullet dug out by an amateur. You're not going to die from a fever, Zachary Sutton. Do you hear me?" His hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing weakly. "Bossy," he murmured, but there was affection in his voice. "Damn right I am," Rebecca replied, and was rewarded with a faint chuckle that turned into a cough. By the morning of the 4th day, the fever broke, and Zachary woke with clear eyes and a healthy appetite. Rebecca brought him eggs and toast, watching with satisfaction as he ate slowly but steadily. "Tell me about the bushwhackers," she said once he had finished eating. "What happened up there?" Zachary's expression darkened. "I was moving some of my cattle to higher pasture for the spring. 3 men jumped me on the trail, guns drawn. They wanted the cattle, wanted my horse, wanted everything. I tried to fight them off, got 1 shot in before they shot me in the chest. Thought that was it, thought I was done for." He paused, his eyes finding hers. "Then an angel appeared out of nowhere and saved my life." "I'm no angel," Rebecca said, but she felt her cheeks warm at the intensity of his gaze. "You are to me," Zachary said quietly. Over the next week, as Zachary regained his strength, Rebecca found herself spending more and more time with him. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their lives. She learned that he was 26, originally from Texas, and had come to California seeking a fresh start after his parents died. He had built his ranch from nothing, working alone for the first year until he could afford to hire a few hands. "It's not much yet," he told her one afternoon as she checked his bandages. "The wound was healing well, the flesh pink and healthy looking. Just a small herd, a basic house and a lot of dreams, but it's mine and I'm proud of it." "You should be," Rebecca said, smoothing the fresh bandage into place. Her fingers lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. Building something from nothing takes real courage. Not as much courage as digging a bullet out of a stranger, Zachary replied, catching her hand before she could pull away. Rebecca, I need to say something. She looked up, her heart suddenly racing. What is it? These past days, getting to know you, talking with you. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I know this might not be proper, and I know we've only just met under the strangest circumstances, but I can't stop thinking about you. About how you saved me, about how you stayed by my side through the fever, about how you make me laugh even when everything hurts. Rebecca's breath caught. She had been feeling the same pull, the same inexplicable connection that seemed to have formed between them from that first moment on the mountain. Zachary, I'd like to court you properly, he said, his gray-blue eyes intense on hers. If you'd be willing, if your father approves. I know I don't have much to offer yet, but I swear I'll work hard to build something worthy of you. She thought about saying something coy, something proper, but Rebecca had never been particularly good at following social conventions. Instead, she squeezed his hand and smiled. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. Her father, when approached by Zachary a few days later, gave his blessing with a knowing smile. I've seen the way you two look at each other, William said. And any man with the grit to survive what you've been through, and the honor to ask permission before courting my daughter has my approval. Just treat her right, Sutton. I will, sir, Zachary promised. I swear it. 2 weeks after Rebecca found him bleeding on that mountain, Zachary was well enough to return to his ranch, though Doc Morrison cautioned him against heavy work for another month at least. Rebecca accompanied him on the ride out to see his place, and found herself charmed by the modest wooden house and the well-tended land stretching out toward the foothills. It needs work, Zachary said, helping her down from her horse. The house could use some repairs, and I want to expand the barn, but the land is good, and the creek never runs dry even in summer. It's wonderful, Rebecca said honestly, looking around at the late afternoon sun painting the grass golden. You've built something real here, Zachary. He took her hand, leading her up onto the porch. I want to build more, a real home, a family, a future, and I want to build it with you if you'll have me. It was too soon, Rebecca knew. They had known each other only a few weeks. But she had held his life in her blood-stained, shaking hands, had fought for him through fever and pain, had learned his heart through long conversations in the quiet hours. Sometimes love did not follow conventional timelines. Yes, she said simply. Zachary's face broke into a brilliant smile, and he pulled her close, kissing her gently. Rebecca melted into the embrace, feeling like she had finally found something she had not even known she was searching for. The next months passed in a blur of happiness. Rebecca continued helping her father run the store while Zachary worked on improving his ranch. They saw each other as often as they could, stolen moments that became the highlights of Rebecca's days. Zachary would ride into town on errands and always stop by the store, staying for dinner and conversation. On Sundays, after church, they would take long walks along the river, talking about their dreams and making plans for the future. I want at least 4 children, Zachary told her one warm June afternoon as they sat on the riverbank, Rebecca's head resting on his shoulder. Maybe more. I always hated being an only child. 4 sounds perfect, Rebecca agreed, though the thought both thrilled and terrified her. 2 boys and 2 girls, perhaps. They'll all have your courage, Zachary said, pressing a kiss to her hair, and your kindness. And your determination, Rebecca countered, and your strength. By August, Zachary formally proposed with a simple gold band he had commissioned from the town's jeweler. Rebecca said yes before he even finished asking the question, throwing her arms around his neck and kissing him soundly while he laughed with joy. They were married in September of 1877, in the small church in Red Bluff, with the entire town in attendance. Rebecca wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in tissue paper, and carried wildflowers from the mountains where their story had begun. Zachary wore his best suit and could not stop smiling as Rebecca walked down the aisle on her father's arm. "I love you," he whispered as they joined hands before the minister. "My angel, my savior, my heart." "I love you too," Rebecca whispered back, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. Always. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and the celebration afterward lasted well into the evening. William Harper gave a toast that had half the guests crying and the other half laughing, speaking of how proud he was of his daughter and how grateful he was that she had found such a good man. Zachary's ranch hands, rough cowboys who had become fiercely loyal to their boss in the months they had worked for him, raised their glasses and cheered so loudly the walls shook. Rebecca and Zachary spent their wedding night at the ranch, in the house that was now her home. Zachary carried her over the threshold as tradition demanded, and they made love slowly and tenderly, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they had learned each other's hearts. "Does it hurt?" Rebecca asked at one point, her fingers tracing gently over the scar on his chest where she had dug out the bullet. It was healed now, a puckered circle of pink tissue that would fade with time. "Not at all," Zachary assured her, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips. "It's just a reminder of how lucky I am, how you saved me in every way a person can be saved." Life on the ranch was different from life in town, but Rebecca adapted quickly. She learned to manage the household, to cook for the ranch hands during busy seasons, to help with the less dangerous aspects of ranching. She still rode into town twice a week to help her father at the store, and Zachary never complained about the time she spent there. He understood how important that connection was to her. The first real test of their marriage came in November when an early winter storm swept through, bringing heavy snow to the mountains and a hard freeze to the valley. Several of Zachary's cattle went missing, and he spent 3 days searching for them in brutal conditions. Rebecca waited at home, trying not to let worry consume her, remembering all too vividly finding him bleeding and dying on that mountain. When he finally returned, half frozen and exhausted, she had hot water ready for a bath and hot food waiting on the stove. She helped him out of his ice-covered clothes and into the warm water, then sat beside the tub and washed his hair, her hands gentle and loving. "I found them," Zachary said through chattering teeth. "All but 2 lost them to the cold, I think." "I'm just glad you came home safe," Rebecca said, pressing a kiss to his temple. "The cattle matter, but not as much as you do." "I hate that you worry," Zachary said, catching her hand. "But I love that you care." "Of course I care," Rebecca said softly. "You're my husband, you're everything to me." That winter was hard, but they weathered it together, growing closer through the challenges. By spring, Rebecca suspected she might be pregnant, and by late April she was certain. She told Zachary one morning over breakfast, simply and directly because that was how they had always communicated. "I'm having a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. "Probably due in late October or early November." Zachary's fork clattered to his plate, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then a smile spread across his face, so wide and joyous that Rebecca found herself smiling back just as broadly. He jumped up from his chair, pulled her to her feet, and spun her around carefully before setting her down and kissing her soundly. "A baby," he breathed against her lips. "We're going to have a baby. Rebecca, that's incredible. You're happy?" She asked, though she could see the answer written plainly on his face. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," Zachary said, his hands cradling her face. "You've given me everything, Rebecca. A home, a family, a reason to wake up grateful every single morning. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Rebecca said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "So much, Zachary." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Rebecca continued to work at the store and around the ranch until her father and Zachary both insisted she needed to rest more. She found she did tire more easily as the months passed, and her body changed in ways both wondrous and strange. Zachary was endlessly fascinated by her growing belly, talking to the baby every night and feeling for kicks with wonder in his eyes. "You think it's a boy or a girl?" he asked one evening in late September, his hand spread across her stomach where the baby was particularly active. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "I hope it's a boy first. I want our son to have the chance to grow up as a big brother to help protect his younger siblings." "A boy would be wonderful," Zachary agreed. "But honestly, as long as the baby is healthy and you come through the birth safely, I don't care if it's a boy or a girl." Rebecca understood his worry. Childbirth was dangerous on the frontier, and many women did not survive it. Her own mother had survived 4 pregnancies, but had told Rebecca many times how frightened she had been each time. But Rebecca refused to let fear dominate. She was strong, and she trusted her body to do what women's bodies had done since the beginning of time. Their son was born on November 3rd, 1878, after a long but ultimately uncomplicated labor. Rebecca labored through most of it with only Zachary by her side, refusing to let him leave even when he turned pale at her pain. Doc Morrison arrived in time for the final stages, and together they brought the baby into the world as dawn broke over the mountains. "It's a boy," Doc Morrison announced, placing the squalling infant on Rebecca's chest. "A big, healthy boy with a good set of lungs on him." Rebecca cradled her son with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face as she counted his tiny fingers and toes, marveled at his perfect little face. Zachary knelt beside the bed, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders, looking at their child with such love and awe that Rebecca fell in love with him all over again. "He's beautiful," Zachary whispered hoarsely, his own eyes wet with tears. "You're beautiful. God, Rebecca, you're amazing." "We made this," Rebecca said wonderingly, touching the baby's soft, dark hair. "This perfect little person, we made him together." They named him Thomas William, after Zachary's father and Rebecca's father. William Harper visited every day for the first week, bringing supplies and sitting with his grandson for hours, telling him stories about his grandmother and all the plans he had for spoiling his grandchildren. Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and growing quickly, and Rebecca found she loved motherhood even more than she had imagined. Watching Zachary with their son melted her heart daily. He was a natural father, patient and loving, always willing to walk the floor with Thomas in the middle of the night or change soiled diapers without complaint. "I never knew I could love something this much," Zachary confessed one night as he rocked Thomas to sleep. "Except for you, of course. The two of you are my whole world." The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Zachary hired 2 more hands and expanded his herd significantly. By 1880, they were doing well enough financially that Zachary could begin making improvements to the house. He added 2 more bedrooms, a proper dining room and a front parlor that Rebecca decorated with care. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Mee, was born in March of 1881. She had Rebecca's auburn hair and Zachary's gray-blue eyes, and her older brother immediately adored her. Thomas, now 2.5, would sit by her cradle for hours, singing to her in his sweet, off-key toddler voice. "He's going to be a wonderful big brother," Rebecca observed one afternoon, watching Thomas gently pat Sarah's hand. "He learned from the best," Zachary said, pulling Rebecca close. "You're an incredible mother, Rebecca. Our children are so lucky to have you." "We're all lucky," Rebecca corrected, leaning into his embrace. "We found each other against all odds, built this beautiful life together. I wouldn't change a single thing, not even the bullet." Zachary laughed at that, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Well, I might have preferred to meet you under less painful circumstances, but I see your point. Everything that happened led us here, to this moment, to this family." In 1883, their third child arrived, another son they named James Edward. He was a loud, robust baby who kept them up at night with his powerful cries, but also filled their home with even more laughter and joy. Thomas was 5 now, starting to learn his letters and numbers, fascinated by everything about the ranch. Sarah was 2, a spirited little girl who followed her big brother everywhere and was already showing signs of her mother's independent streak. Rebecca's father, now in his 60s and slowing down, decided to turn over the running of the store to his assistant and semi-retire. He built a small cabin on Zachary and Rebecca's land, close enough to see his grandchildren daily but far enough to give the young family their privacy. "I'm getting old," William told Rebecca one evening as they watched the children play in the yard. "I want to spend whatever time I have left watching these little ones grow up. You've built something wonderful here, Rebecca. Your mother would be so proud." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes at the mention of her mother. "I wish she could have met them, could have met Zachary." "She knows," William said firmly. "Wherever she is, she knows, and she's proud of you. I'm proud of you too, daughter. You saved a dying man with your bare hands, built a life with him, raised beautiful children. You're remarkable." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease and crops that failed, but through it all, Rebecca and Zachary's love never wavered. They supported each other through every difficulty, celebrated every triumph together, and continued to build their family and their ranch into something lasting and strong. In 1885, their fourth and final child was born, a daughter they named Catherine Rose. Rebecca was 30 now, and they decided that 4 children was enough, that their family was complete. Catherine was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes that seemed to take in everything. Thomas was now 7, already helping with simple ranch chores and proving himself to be responsible and hardworking. Sarah was 4, as wild and fearless as her mother, insisting on learning to ride despite being barely tall enough to see over a pony's back. James was 2, a cheerful whirlwind of energy who got into everything and kept everyone on their toes. The house was always full of noise and activity, and Rebecca loved every chaotic moment. She had never imagined, during those quiet years helping run the store after her mother's death, that her life would become so full, so rich with love and purpose. One evening in the summer of 1886, after the children were all in bed and the house was finally quiet, Rebecca and Zachary sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. These were Rebecca's favorite moments, when it was just the two of them, connected by the easy silence of 2 people who knew each other completely. "You remember the day we met?" Zachary asked suddenly, his arm around her shoulders. "Of course I do," Rebecca replied, leaning into him. "You were bleeding to death on a mountain, and I was terrified out of my mind." "Your hands were shaking so badly," Zachary recalled, his fingers finding the scar on his chest through his shirt. "But you did it anyway. You were brave when you needed to be, even though you were scared." "I couldn't let you die," Rebecca said simply. "Something inside me knew even then that you were important, that saving you mattered." It changed both our lives, Zachary said softly. If those bushwhackers had never shot me, if you had never been hunting that morning, if you had gone a different direction, we might never have met. I don't like to think about that, Rebecca admitted. This life, this family, it all feels so right, like it was always meant to be. It was meant to be, Zachary said firmly, turning to face her. I believe that with everything in me. We were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together. You're the love of my life, Rebecca, the only woman I'll ever love. And you're mine, Rebecca said, tears gathering in her eyes. My stubborn, strong, wonderful husband. I love you more now than I did on the day we married, and I'll love you more with every year that passes. They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Inside the house, their children slept safely in their beds. In the barn, healthy cattle rested. On the land, crops grew strong. Everything they had built together, everything they had fought for and worked for and dreamed of, was real and solid and theirs. The years continued to unfold like chapters in a beloved book. William Harper lived to see all 4 of his grandchildren grow past early childhood, a fact he considered one of his greatest blessings, before he passed peacefully in his sleep in 1889 at the age of 68. His loss was felt deeply by the whole family, but especially by Rebecca, who had been close to her father all her life. He was so proud of you, Zachary told her on the night after they buried William in the Red Bluff Cemetery next to Rebecca's mother. Of us, of the children. He told me once that finding you up on that mountain was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me, and he was right. I miss him already, Rebecca said, wiping away tears. But I'm grateful he got to know his grandchildren, that he got to see how happy we are. Thomas, now 11, had grown into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved the ranch and already talked about running it himself someday. Sarah, 8, was as wild and free as ever, an expert rider who could rope a calf almost as well as some of the ranch hands. James, 6, was the family peacemaker, always trying to smooth over conflicts between his siblings with his natural charm. And Catherine, 4, was quiet and observant, but when she spoke, everyone listened because she always had something important to say. The ranch had grown significantly over the years. Zachary now had 15 hands working for him during peak seasons, and his herd numbered in the hundreds. The house had been expanded twice more and was now a proper ranch house, large and comfortable, with enough room for their growing family and the guests who frequently stayed with them. Rebecca had gotten involved in the community in Red Bluff, helping establish a proper school and serving on the church committee. She taught Sunday school and organized charity drives for families in need. People respected her, not just as Zachary Sutton's wife, but as a capable, intelligent woman in her own right. In 1892, when Thomas turned 14, Zachary officially made him his assistant foreman, teaching him the business side of ranching alongside the practical skills he had been learning for years. Thomas took to the responsibility with maturity beyond his years, and Rebecca often found herself amazed at the young man her son was becoming. "He reminds me of you," she told Zachary one evening as they watched Thomas working with one of the new horses. "Same determination, same integrity." "He has your courage," Zachary replied, "and your heart. All our children do." Sarah, at 11, announced that she wanted to help train horses, not just ride them. Zachary was hesitant at first, worried about the danger, but Rebecca advocated for their daughter. "She's good at it," Rebecca argued, "and she's careful, despite appearances. Let her try, Zachary. If we don't let our daughters pursue their interests, how are we any different from those who said women couldn't run businesses or vote or do anything beyond keeping house?" Zachary relented, and Sarah proved her mother right. She had a natural gift with horses, a patience and intuition that even the most experienced hands acknowledged. By the time she was 13, ranchers from 3 counties away were bringing difficult horses to the Sutton Ranch specifically for Sarah to train. James, at 10, discovered a love for learning that surprised everyone. He devoured every book he could get his hands on and talked constantly about wanting to go to university someday. Rebecca and Zachary encouraged this dream, setting aside money specifically for his education. Catherine, at 8, revealed an artistic talent that manifested in beautiful drawings of the ranch, the animals, and her family. Her room was covered in sketches, and Rebecca carefully preserved every one, knowing they were capturing moments in time that would never come again. The family weathered the panic of 1893, the economic depression that hit the country hard. The ranch struggled that year as cattle prices plummeted, but they survived by being careful with money and working even harder than usual. It brought them closer together, reminded them that prosperity could not be taken for granted. "We've been through worse," Zachary told Rebecca one night when she was worried about the finances. "We'll get through this too, we always do," and they did. By 1895, the economy was recovering, and the ranch was thriving again. Thomas was 17 now, nearly a man, and talking seriously about the future of the ranch. Sarah was 14, still training horses and earning a reputation as one of the best in the region. James was 12, studying hard and planning for university. Catherine was 10, quiet and creative, bringing beauty into their lives with her art. On their 20th wedding anniversary in September of 1897, Zachary took Rebecca back up into the mountains where they first met. They rode their horses to the exact spot where she had found him bleeding and stood there together looking out over the valley below. 20 years, Zachary said wonderingly, his arm around Rebecca's waist. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a whole lifetime. "It has been a whole lifetime," Rebecca said softly. "The life we built together from this very spot. Everything started here with blood and fear and courage." Zachary turned her to face him, taking both her hands in his. "I want you to know something. These 20 years with you have been the happiest of my life. You saved me that day, Rebecca, and you've continued saving me every day since. You made me a better man, gave me a family and a home and a purpose. I love you more than words can ever express." "I love you too," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me adventure when I thought my life would be ordinary. You gave me children and a home and a love I never dared to dream of. That day I found you was the luckiest day of my life." They kissed there on the mountain, in the place where their story began, and it felt like coming full circle. The scared young woman who had dug a bullet out with shaking hands and the dying man she had saved were still there, somehow, in the confident middle-aged couple they had become. But they were also so much more now, shaped by years of love and partnership and building a life together. As the new century approached, the Sutton family was stronger than ever. Thomas, at 19, was essentially running the ranch alongside his father, proving himself more than capable. He had started courting a local girl, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and Rebecca suspected an engagement announcement was not far off. Sarah, at 16, was as independent as ever, still training horses and talking about traveling to other ranches to learn different techniques. She had no interest in marriage yet, much to the disappointment of several young men in the area, but Rebecca supported her daughter's desire to forge her own path. James, at 14, had earned a scholarship to a university in San Francisco, a tremendous achievement that filled the whole family with pride. He would leave in the fall of 1899, and while Rebecca dreaded his departure, she was thrilled that he would have opportunities she and Zachary had never had. Catherine, at 12, was creating artwork that people actually wanted to buy. She had sold several paintings to families in Red Bluff, and there was talk of a gallery in Sacramento showing interest in her work. "We raised remarkable children," Rebecca said to Zachary one evening as they sat on their porch, a ritual they had maintained through all the years of their marriage. "We gave them love, stability, and the freedom to be themselves," Zachary replied. "The rest is all them. They're good people, Rebecca, because they had a good mother." "And a good father," Rebecca added, squeezing his hand. "We did this together, Zachary. Everything we built as partners." The turn of the century brought both excitement and nostalgia. On January 1st, 1900, the whole family gathered on the porch to watch the sun rise on a new era. Rebecca stood between Zachary and Thomas, with Sarah, James, and Catherine clustered around them, and felt overwhelming gratitude for everything life had given her. "A new century," Zachary said quietly. "Who knows what it will bring?" "Whatever it brings, we'll face it together," Rebecca said firmly. "Just like we always have." Thomas married his sweetheart, Emily, in the spring of 1900 and brought her to live at the ranch. Rebecca liked her new daughter-in-law immediately, appreciating her practical nature and kind heart. When Emily became pregnant later that year, Rebecca was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. Her first grandchild, a boy named William after both his great-grandfathers, was born in April of 1901. Rebecca held him for the first time and felt her heart expand in ways she had not expected. Being a grandmother was different from being a mother, sweeter somehow, less fraught with worry. "He's perfect," she whispered to Emily, who lay exhausted but happy in the bed where Rebecca herself had given birth to all 4 of her children. "Absolutely perfect." Zachary was equally smitten with his grandson, and Rebecca often found him holding the baby and telling him stories about the ranch, about his parents, about the day his grandmother saved his grandfather's life. James left for university in the fall of 1901, and while Rebecca missed him terribly, she was proud beyond measure. He wrote long letters home describing his studies, his new friends, the excitement of city life. He was the first in the family to pursue higher education, and they were all deeply proud of him. Sarah, at 18, shocked everyone by announcing she had fallen in love with one of the ranch hands, a quiet man named Daniel who was as gifted with horses as she was. Zachary was skeptical at first, protective of his daughter, but Rebecca saw how Daniel looked at Sarah, saw the respect and love there, and gave her blessing. "She's more like you than either of us realized," Zachary told Rebecca after Sarah and Daniel's engagement was announced. "Independent, strong-willed, knows her own mind. I suppose I should have expected she would choose her own path in this too." Sarah and Daniel married in 1902 in a small ceremony at the ranch, then built their own cabin on Sutton land. They started a horse training business that quickly became successful, and Rebecca loved having her daughter so close, loved watching her thrive in her chosen career. Catherine, at 14, won a prestigious art competition in Sacramento, and her painting was displayed in the state capitol building. The whole family traveled to see it, and Rebecca stood before her daughter's artwork with tears streaming down her face, amazed at the talent Catherine possessed. "You did that," Zachary murmured in her ear, his arm around her waist. "You encouraged her, believed in her, gave her the confidence to pursue her gift." "We both did," Rebecca corrected, as she always did. "Everything good in our lives we did together." More grandchildren arrived over the next few years. Thomas and Emily had 2 more sons and a daughter. Sarah and Daniel had twin girls who were as wild and fearless as their mother. Even James, though still at university, met and married a professor's daughter and brought her home to meet the family in 1905. Rebecca was 49 years old in 1905, and Zachary was 53. They were grandparents multiple times over now, and the ranch had become one of the most successful in the region. But what mattered most to Rebecca was not the success or the prosperity. What mattered was the love that still bound her and Zachary together as tightly as it had on the day they married. The family they had created together, the life they had built from nothing. One evening that summer, they rode up into the mountains again, just the two of them, to the place where it all began. They did this every few years, a pilgrimage of sorts, a reminder of where they came from. Rebecca dismounted and walked to the exact spot where she had found Zachary bleeding to death 28 years ago. She could still remember it so clearly, the fear, the determination, the way her hands had shaken as she dug that bullet out. "What are you thinking?" Zachary asked, coming to stand beside her. "I'm thinking about how one moment can change everything," Rebecca said softly. "If I had gone a different way that morning, if I had been even a few minutes earlier or later, we never would have met. All those children, all those grandchildren, none of them would exist. It's staggering when you really think about it." "Fate," Zachary said simply. "We were meant to find each other, Rebecca. I've always believed that." "I believe it too," Rebecca agreed, turning to face him. "You're still the love of my life, Zachary Sutton. After all these years, after everything we've been through, I love you more than ever." "And you're mine," Zachary said, pulling her close. "My savior, my partner, my heart. Everything good in my life started the day you found me. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They held each other there on the mountain as the sun set, two people who had built something extraordinary from a moment of crisis and courage. Around them, the wilderness stretched out silent and beautiful, witness to their love story, to the miracle of two lives intertwining and creating something greater than either could have achieved alone. The years continued to pass gently. Catherine eventually moved to San Francisco to pursue her art career seriously, but visited often and kept in close touch with the family. James became a professor himself, teaching history at the same university where he had been a student. He and his wife had 3 children, and though they lived in the city, they spent every summer at the ranch. Thomas took over full management of the ranch when Zachary turned 60 in 1912, though Zachary still worked alongside his son daily, unable to fully retire from the life he loved. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's leadership, and Rebecca was proud of the man her oldest son had become. Sarah's horse training business expanded to include breeding, and the Sutton horses became known throughout California for their quality and temperament. She and Daniel had 4 children total, all of whom inherited their parents' way with animals. In 1917, when Rebecca turned 61 and Zachary 65, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children's spouses, and their numerous grandchildren. The ranch house was bursting with people, noise, and laughter, and Rebecca looked around at the family she and Zachary had created and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 40 years, she said to Zachary that night, after everyone had finally settled down and they were alone on their porch, sitting in the same chairs they had occupied for decades. "How did 40 years pass so quickly?" "Because we were happy," Zachary replied simply. "Time flies when you're living a good life with someone you love." His hair was completely gray now, and he moved a bit slower than he used to. But to Rebecca, he was still the handsome man she had found bleeding in the mountains, still the love of her life. She knew she looked older too, her auburn hair liberally streaked with silver, her face lined from years of sun and laughter and life. But when Zachary looked at her, she still felt beautiful. "You remember what you said to me on our 20th anniversary?" Rebecca asked. "Up on the mountain where we met. I said you had saved me and continued saving me every day," Zachary recalled. "And it's still true, Rebecca, even more true now than it was then." "We saved each other," Rebecca said firmly. "That's what marriage is, I think. Two people saving each other over and over, through all the years and all the challenges, building something together that's stronger than either person alone." "Wise words," Zachary said with a soft smile. "But then, you've always been the wise one in this partnership." "And you've always been the strong one," Rebecca countered. "Though I suppose we've both been both at different times." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the mountains. This was their favorite time, had been for 40 years. After the work was done and the house was quiet, just the two of them together, connected by a bond that had only strengthened with time. More years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow. They lost friends to illness and old age, watched the world change around them in ways both wonderful and frightening. The Great War touched their lives when two of Thomas's sons enlisted, and Rebecca aged a decade in the year they were overseas, not able to breathe fully until both boys returned home safe. By 1920, Rebecca was 64 and Zachary was 68. They were now great-grandparents, as Thomas's oldest son had married and had a daughter. The ranch was in its third generation of Sutton ownership and showed no signs of declining. The house and land that Zachary had built from nothing had become a legacy, something that would outlast them both. "We did good, didn't we?" Zachary asked one evening, his health beginning to fail now, his body finally showing the wear of a life of hard work. "We did wonderful," Rebecca said, holding his hand tightly. "We built something beautiful, Zachary. A family, a home, a legacy. I regret nothing." "Neither do I," Zachary said, "except maybe getting shot. That hurt like hell." Rebecca laughed through her tears because even now, facing the end, Zachary could make her laugh. "It was worth it though, wasn't it, if getting shot led you to me?" "It was worth everything," Zachary said seriously. 1,000 bullets would have been worth it to have this life with you." Zachary Sutton passed peacefully in his sleep in February of 1921, with Rebecca beside him holding his hand. He was 69 years old and had lived a full, rich life. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Northern California, a testament to the respect and love people had for him. Rebecca grieved deeply, but she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together that continued on without him. She stayed at the ranch, helping Thomas however she could, spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and taking daily walks up into the foothills to feel close to Zachary's spirit. On what would have been their 44th wedding anniversary in September of 1921, Rebecca rode up into the mountains one last time to the place where she had found Zachary dying. She was 65 now, and the ride was harder than it had been, but she needed to be there. She stood at that spot and looked out over the valley, remembering everything. The blood, the fear, her shaking hands digging out that bullet, the way he had looked at her with such trust and courage, the life they had built from that moment of crisis and connection. "Thank you," she said aloud, not sure if she was talking to Zachary's spirit, to God, to fate, or to her younger self. "Thank you for that moment, for the courage to save him, for 43 beautiful years together. I miss you every day, my love, but I know we'll see each other again someday." Rebecca lived another 12 years, surrounded by family and love. She saw her grandchildren marry and have children of their own, saw the ranch continue to thrive, saw the world continue to change in remarkable ways. She told stories to anyone who would listen about the old days, about the Wild West in its true glory, about a time when courage and determination could build a life from nothing. When Rebecca Harper Sutton passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1933, she was 77 years old, and she died with a smile on her face, whispering Zachary's name one last time. Her children buried her beside Zachary in the Red Bluff Cemetery, under a stone that read, "Rebecca Harper Sutton, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she was brave when it mattered most." The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the Sutton family, always with stories of how it all began. Children grew up hearing about their great-great-grandmother Rebecca, who had saved a dying man's life with her bare hands, who had the courage to dig a bullet out while shaking with fear, because letting him die was not an option. They heard about the love story that grew from that moment, about two people who built something extraordinary together from nothing but hard work, determination, and love. The house still stood on the same land Zachary had claimed in 1874, expanded and modernized over the decades, but still recognizably the same building where 4 children had been born, where countless family dinners had been shared, where 2 people had loved each other through 43 years of marriage. The mountains where Rebecca found Zachary still rose up in the distance, eternal and unchanging, bearing silent witness to the legacy of courage and love that had started there so many years ago. And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings, when the wind blew down from those mountains, you could almost hear the echo of that long-ago moment. The sound of hoofbeats as Rebecca rode up to find a dying man. The sound of her voice, steady despite her fear, promising to help him. The sound of 2 lives colliding and intertwining in a moment that would echo through generations. It was a story of the Wild West, of survival and courage, of bullets and blood and determination. But more than that, it was a love story. The kind of love that changes everything, that builds legacies, that endures beyond death and time. The kind of love that starts with one moment of courage, one choice to help a stranger, one decision that changes 2 lives forever. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the ranch or the success or the legacy, but the love. The love between Rebecca and Zachary, built on trust and respect and partnership. The love they gave to their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The love that still lived on in every descendant who carried their blood, who heard their story, who understood that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reach out and save a life, even when your hands are shaking and you are terrified and you have no idea if you can actually do it. Rebecca had done it. She had saved Zachary's life that day on the mountain, and in doing so, she had saved her own. She had given them both a future, a family, a love story that would be told and retold through generations. She had been brave when it mattered most, and that courage had created something beautiful and lasting. That was the legacy. Not just the ranch or the family name, but the proof that love can grow from the darkest moments, that courage can create miracles, that 2 people who choose each other every single day can build something that lasts far beyond their own lives. The story of Rebecca and Zachary was one of thousands of love stories from the American West, but it was also unique, precious, and eternal. It was proof that sometimes getting lost leads you exactly where you need to be, that sometimes the worst day of your life can also be the beginning of the best days, that sometimes love arrives when you least expect it in the form of a dying man on a mountain, and a woman brave enough to save him. And that was how their story would be remembered, passed down through all the generations that followed. The rancher who was shot in the chest in the mountains, the woman who found him and dug out the bullet with her bare hands shaking. And the love that grew from that moment of courage and compassion, a love that lasted 43 years and beyond, a love that created a legacy that would never be forgotten.